Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Rendez-vous AgriUrbains webinar series. These seminars are made possible thanks to the support of the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food of Quebec, MAPAC, and the Ministry of Employment and Social Solidarity. Today's session is presented in collaboration with the Center for Studies in Food Security as part of our shared commitment to advancing research and dialogue on urban agriculture policy and practice. So I'm pleased to welcome Joe Nassar, who will act as a facilitator for today's discussion. And he will offer brief context, as well as our two presenters, Richard Bloomfield and Kassie Miedema. So Richard is an assistant professor in management and organizational studies at Huron University College, Western University, and Kassie is a researcher in management and organizational studies at Huron University College, Western University. So they will present findings from their research on the urban agriculture strategy of London, Ontario, examining how municipal policy, socio-economic pressures, and community capacity are shaping urban agriculture in a mid-sized Canadian city. Their presentation will highlight both the successes and the barriers encountered since the adoption of the city's strategy and offer insights relevant to municipalities, practitioners, and researchers alike. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on OLAB's YouTube channel by next week. A Q&A session will take place at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to post your questions in the chat throughout the session so we can return to them later. At the end of the webinar, a short satisfaction survey will appear on your screen. It only takes a few minutes to complete, and your feedback is very valuable to us. So I will now hand it over to Joe for a few contextual remarks before we begin the presentation. Thanks, you.
Jad. Can we go back one more slide for now? No, back. Okay. So thanks, Jad, for getting us started, and for Eric Duchemin for offering to co-organize with Toronto Metropolitan University's Center for Studies in Food Security to organize a joint webinar with ULAB. Hopefully, this will be the start of an occasional collaboration on such joint events. This is our first, and I think it's the first event in English that IULAB has
it's the second.
Yeah.
So
I would like to thank all those who worked on organizing this, particularly Fleur Esteron from the CSFS side, and Jad from the IULAB side, and of course Richie and Kassie. Also, I'd like to thank Professor Yukari Seko, the CSFS director, who welcomed the opportunity for such a joint venture. And next slide, please. And by the way, we will also be putting the recording on the CSFS website once it's available. And so, oh, sorry, one more slide. It's kind of a bit out of sequence. So before I forget, so the CSFS organizes webinars occasionally, actually more and more frequently these days. And this will be the third webinar that we're offering this semester. So it's just to save the date. So one on perspectives on Indigenous food security on April 28th. Okay, so now a bit of context. So I'll just provide a very brief context for the research that led to this project. I've long been involved with urban agriculture advocacy, research, and teaching, particularly in Toronto, for over 2 decades. I connected with Kassie Miedema, a young architect, about a decade ago, who was working on a report about the potential for urban agriculture in her hometown of London, Ontario, building on some of our experience in Toronto and was happening in other cities. Kassie took a course with me at TMU, and I helped her publish an article that was based on that report that she prepared, which she's going to talk about during her talk. Eventually, she connected with Richie, who was putting together a research proposal from the Canadian, from SSHRC, Canadian Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, along with a couple of other colleagues that they mentioned. This proposal was successful. A journal article, and we can go to the article, back one, sorry. A journal article was published after that, and this led to the idea of a public presentation on this research and lessons from it. So I will pass it on to Richie and Kassie to pick up the story in full. And then I will be moderating the Q&A. So feel free to start sharing questions when they come up, typing them, and we'll take it from there. And if there are a lot of questions, might stay a little past 1 o'clock for those who have the time. And otherwise, look forward to hearing the joint presentation between Richie and Kassie.
Okay, wonderful. Hopefully everyone can see my screen at this point. And thank you very much, Joe, for the introduction, and welcome to everybody. Thanks for being here. Kassie and I are delighted to share with you a little bit about the results of some of the research we've been working on over the past 3 years or so. As Joe indicated, a chunk of that time was fortunately funded as part of a SSHRC grant, which we're quite grateful for. And well, our purposes here today are really just to share some of the highlights, including the successes and barriers in relation to the adoption of an urban agriculture strategy in London, Ontario. And to get us started, I will briefly introduce the research team entirely that Kassie and I are here today representing. I was the principal investigator on this project, and I'm currently working on my PhD in the Geography and Environment Department at Western University. My research is oriented around farmland access for first and next generation farmers. And my connection to urban agriculture is primarily through being part of a nonprofit urban farm that was started about almost 8 or 9 years ago, which grows on about an acre of land, a variety of vegetables to distribute affordably throughout London. Daishin Lee was my master's supervisor at the Ivey Business School and really got me started on the research side of things. And she has a background in sustainable food supply chains, in particular around reducing food waste. And Becky Ellis is also a graduate of the PhD program in Geography and Environment at Western University. She's a professor now at Mohawk College and has been long involved in Toronto, Hamilton, and London around urban agriculture activism, and in particular around pollinators in the urban context.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kassie Miedema. I was the lead researcher on this project. Joe mentioned my connection to urban agriculture and to him, but it started about 12 years ago for me when I was doing my master's in architecture and I was studying urban agriculture in London. Since then, I went on to study foresight and design at OCAD College in Toronto, and I leveraged that expertise in this project as well. And Joe on this project was really playing an advisory role to our research. So as you can see, we have a pretty diverse team from different institutions, different backgrounds, different disciplines, which I think has really benefited our research in this project. Next slide. Yeah. Yes, so the origins of this project are deep, back to my architecture thesis when I first started studying agriculture, urban agriculture in London. I used a systems design approach to map the local food network in the Hamilton Road corridor, which is a lower income neighborhood in London, Ontario. That research, that work predates the creation and adoption of the City of London's urban agriculture strategy. In fact, by the end of my thesis, I presented my work to the Urban Agriculture Steering Committee, and that was a nice full circle moment. During my research, I kind of drew on from lessons adapted from Rob Hopkins. He founded the Transition Movement, which is a grassroots initiative that fosters local resilience and sustainability through community-led solutions. As part of this systems approach, I documented all existing and potential urban agriculture and food-related sites in the area before envisioning how they could operate as a local connected food network. And as Joe mentioned, this project we're here to talk to you about today began with a cold call from Richie and our decision to see what has happened in London nearly 8 to 10 years later after my original study. And we expanded the scope to the whole of London. We wanted to get a sense how the urban agriculture scene has evolved, what's working well, what challenges still persist, and where there's room to grow. So we took a closer look at how policy changes since the urban ag strategy was approved in 2019, and how that's shaped things and how that's informed what best practices are emerging.
So to zoom in just a little bit in terms of the history of the strategy itself, and why it felt like a interesting case study for us to dig into more. Really, this emerged before the pandemic, actually. So in London's context, shortly after 2015, there was quite a groundswell of interest from the community, and a lot of advocacy and pressure was put on the municipality to take urban agriculture seriously. And this ultimately manifested in the consultation to develop a strategy report, which after the consultation in 2017 eventually was put forth to council and officially adopted in 2019. And alongside this, there was also the adoption and creation of the Urban Agriculture Steering Committee, which Kassie mentioned a moment ago. And that was really the mechanism to ask for and recommend bylaw amendments to council. So an avenue for the community to do so. And this really was also unique because there were certainly other food action plans that have been developed long before the London Urban Agriculture Strategy. Calgary, for example, adopted in 2012. Several other cities in Western Canada in a similar time frame, and more famously, Toronto long before that. But in all of these other cases, typically the Food Policy Council was often directing this. In London's case, the Food Policy Council didn't exist yet. And in all of these other cases, the urban agriculture strategy portion was a component of a much larger strategy. And so London sat in a unique sense that it was a independent strategy focused exclusively on urban agriculture and had somewhat raised expectations around it. And so we felt that that was worth digging into. And what our research project really sought to do was understand from the perspectives of those who were involved, what the creation, adoption, and impact of the strategy was. And so to do that, we spoke with 25 individuals who are actively involved in various capacities in urban agriculture in London. And that started in 2023. After we concluded our interviews, we brought some of those same participants together along with other members of the community who were, again, active and interested in urban agriculture to a foresight workshop. And Kassie will explain a bit more about that in a moment. And alongside the workshop, which happened in 2024, we, of course, have done additional analysis, literature review, policy analysis, and so forth to supplement this work. And on the note of the interview design itself, these were intentionally semi-structured qualitative interviews. And what we're really trying to do with those conversations is understand and capture the level of awareness that folks involved in urban agriculture had of the strategy. We'll talk more about that, but not only that, but also what kind of changes they were seeing, what impacts, both positive and negative, that they had experienced since the creation and adoption of this strategy. So, ultimately, these interviews, in combination with the workshop and the literature review, have culminated in the publication that Joe mentioned at the outset of today's talk, published recently in the Journal of Agriculture, Food Systems, and Community Development, a wonderful open source journal. And we'll post the links to that for those interested in the full study in the chat today.
So in addition to those interviews and the policy analysis, we wanted to complement that with community-informed insights. To do that, we designed and ran a foresight workshop where we invited community practitioners, municipal government, academics, students, and the general public to participate. We used the Three Horizons foresight framework, which was developed by futurist and systems thinker Bill Sharp. We leveraged it as a collaborative tool to gain insights into the participants' diverse perspectives, their expertise, and their lived experiences. So the way that this tool works is we look at 3 different horizons. In Horizon 1, we explore how things are working right now. What is the current state of urban agriculture in London? Then we jump purposefully to Horizon 3, to the future, and we ask participants to imagine a preferred vision of how things could be. What could urban agriculture look like in 2050? And then in the last phase, we go back to Horizon 2, which is the interstitial horizon, and participants have to bridge the present and the future to identify what big and small changes need to happen to get us to that preferred future that they described in Horizon 3. How do we get from present day all the way to our ideal future and build the steps along the way?
And so we'll transition now towards some of the key findings. And again, as we were describing, the purpose of this research study is really about documenting sort of so-called on-the-ground realities and what I would describe as the connection and or disconnection to the strategy that we could see in London since the adoption of by council of that strategy. So I'll start on the positive side of the ledger, so to speak, here with some of the strengths and successes which were brought forward repeatedly in our participant interviews and also at the workshop. And we've spoken about this a little bit, but to put it in more concrete terms, the interest was growing quite quickly, and this is both pre-pandemic and during the pandemic in London's context. So the first urban farm was established in 2017, which is right when the strategy was starting to get developed. And there are several other organizations documented in our study that also had their start in and around this time frame that Kassie and I have been talking about. Another example was the London Food Bank. Ended up building a significant sized greenhouse in 2020, which was again to supplement their own distribution. And then as the pandemic emerged, there was already quite a bit of quite a long wait list for community gardens, and that exploded around that time in addition. So wait list got quite a bit longer, and this is all examples of the energy that were, especially in that first 5 to 7 years of this study, that many participants talked about as a key driver for how the strategy even came to be in the first place. Another large success that many people pointed to was the creation of the Urban Ag Steering Committee, which has since been disbanded. But at the time when it was created, this was really an exciting way for those who were interested to have a direct line of communication to the municipality where those policy changes can happen. So bylaw amendments sometimes were site specific, so allowing for an urban farm like Urban Roots to sell produce. That was something that was driven through this steering committee, but also for broader bylaw amendment changes as well. And that included one of the noteworthy changes there was allowing residents in the city to sell produce that they had grown in their backyard up to 20 times per year. And previously that was only twice a year. So there were some significant positive movements there through the steering committee, eventually adopted by council. And the last key strength or success that we really heard a lot about is that by having this standalone urban agriculture strategy officially adopted into London's official plan, really gave it a level of institutional support. And there had been for many years people that worked, of course, within the municipality who were supportive of various urban agriculture initiatives. Community gardens, of course, long preceded any strategy, but there really wasn't a formal sort of institutional acknowledgement of what urban agriculture could be and what its importance could be.
So as Richie mentioned, there's all this kinds of momentum and excitement that was expressed to us from our participants for urban agriculture. This is one of the quotes that came out of our interviews. It was 2022. We were still living through the pandemic. There were supply chain disruptions and food shortages. I think people also wanted just a reason to be outside. And also, I think it gave them a sense of control when something very scary and uncontrollable was happening in the world. And I want to take this opportunity to signpost that we go into a lot more of the cultural dimensions of the reasons for participating in urban agriculture in our published report. But despite all this, there were still a lot of persistent challenges identified. And I just want to highlight that participants saw growing food as like a beacon of hope, but unfortunately, there were barriers that they were met with. Sorry, that's my bad. I'm not following our schedule. So yeah, Richie mentioned the steering committee had dissolved at this point, so there was limited dedicated city staff. There was one person working part-time on this, kind of off the side of their desk. There was also a lack of funding and hesitancy towards allowing greenhouses and other structures to be built. People also spoke to us about having difficulty finding suitable sites and accessing land to grow on. And there was no point person to explain these zoning regulations and approval processes. Also, the report, it was kind of mixed reviews about people who had heard of it and not heard of it. Most participants of our interviews were aware of the report. Some had only heard of it, but many didn't find it actionable. And a third of our interviewees who were actively working in urban agriculture in London had not even heard of the strategy. So I think this really identifies a lack of communication and a lack of follow-through. And as I mentioned, there's no clear processes in place for those interested in urban agriculture and getting projects going. Zoning was ambiguous. People are asking, am I allowed to grow food here? There's building code gaps. What building occupancy does a greenhouse or a hoop house fall under? What are the definitions of those structures? And gardeners weren't sure if they'd have access to their plots in the future, which makes it hard to invest in those permanent structures and permanent infrastructure. Furthermore, equity deserving groups are less able to navigate an unclear system. These ambiguous rules and fragmented processes tend to favor those with existing resources, institutional knowledge, and networks. What this does is it creates additional barriers for those with fewer time, connections, and administrative capacity.
And so once we outline both the persistent challenges and some of the strengths and successes that we saw, our paper turns its attention to some of the recommendations specifically for London's context, but then we'll broaden this as well to other cities and what we can learn from this. So there's both short-term and long-term recommendations that we heard again from the participants in our interviews and in our workshop. You heard earlier us mention the point person at the municipality. So there actually was somebody in London's context that had a quarter basically of their time was specifically allocated to urban agriculture related things. And when that person at the city retired, that allocation of time was not reallocated. And so since then, there's been some challenges. People don't know who they can talk to, despite the fact that the urban agriculture strategy is on the books. There isn't a point person at the municipality you can ask questions about that. And I mentioned a couple of moments ago about the steering committee, which has been disbanded. There's been some moves in recent months to either bring this back or bring it underneath another pre-existing steering committee. But once again, it went from a very clear path. There is an urban agriculture steering committee that can make direct recommendations based on the strategy to council to something a lot less clear for people to navigate. And then another common thing that we really heard a lot about is access to not very expensive things, but very important things like soil testing and startup costs, typically around access to water for growing sites. And the soil testing in particular is important given how much land can be contaminated from previous industrial uses in a city and not something that is easy to determine without proper testing. On the longer term perspective, the three biggest recommendations that we heard about were providing pre-approval for land. So now that we have in London a strategy that's part of the official plan, why not have sites across the city that are pre-approved by the municipality that this could be land used for urban agriculture. It doesn't mean it will be or it has to be, but that there has been the soil testing done and so forth, and the permission given to in advance by the city, and that this could be publicly available, as opposed to folks who are trying to find spaces that might then get amended and approved through quite a long process, and might be tricky to find the right avenue to go through. Also, lots of people brought forward the opportunities in London. We have multiple post-secondary institutions here in the city, as well as, of course, high school, secondary schools, primary schools, and school boards that could potentially partner around various training programs to give a boost for more interest in urban agriculture. And finally, there was quite a lot of mention about opportunities for municipalities in particular to push local food procurements. And this could be something that goes beyond urban agriculture and helps bridge the sometimes perceived gap between rural agriculture and urban agriculture. And so a lot of folks saw quite a lot of opportunity there. Zooming out beyond London, again, some of these things I think could be quite applicable to other mid-sized cities. And so for those who are interested in, on the practitioner kind of policymaker side of things, it does seem quite important from what we read in other studies, but also what we experienced in our research in London, that having urban agriculture embedded within planning frameworks in some official capacity is very important to support implementation. But of course, as long as it doesn't remain a document on the shelf, so to speak, there's going to have to be someone driving action on that. Another general application certainly was the secure access to land. This can be through avenues like zoning commonly, but also more transparent processes around access to various public lands, which are generally not clear. And there is a need to build coordination and communication right across private sector, community members, and the municipal partners, including multilingual outreach. And this is something that throughout the presentation has come up. One of the biggest challenges, and this is true in London, is just not knowing where to turn to, and there's not a lot of clear information that is available to those who want to be involved. And as Kassie mentioned earlier, an entire third of our participants who are involved in urban agriculture weren't even aware of the strategy itself. And this speaks, I think, to the last broader takeaway, which is the municipal capacity can be funding and stable resourcing. That's certainly an option, but at a minimum, clear staff roles and who is the person that you should reach out to if you have questions about expanding or starting some kind of urban agriculture initiative. So those are some of the key, more broader takeaways on the practitioner and policy side of things. And Kassie will talk about some other applications.
Yeah. As Richie mentioned at the beginning, London isn't the only city with an urban agriculture strategy. During our research, we also found a need for a comparative analysis of who's doing what in terms of urban agriculture policy. It fell outside of the scope of our project, but I suspect that these urban agriculture strategies that exist across Canada are worked on in silos. And so there's also a need for a convening forum for those working on urban ag at the policy level to discuss and compare. And speaking of silos, there are so many pressing issues that face our cities today, like housing shortages, climate change, and advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they're all worked on individually and piecemeal. We see a huge opportunity for that research that holistically integrates urban agriculture with solutions to these other challenges. And so, as we're wrapping up our presentation today, we talked a lot about the current system in London and its barriers and challenges, but I want to end with some hopeful inspiration. So this visioning exercise was part of our foresight workshop that I spoke about earlier in the presentation. And the goal was to imagine the role of urban agriculture in 2050. And these are some of the aspirations or visions for the future of urban agriculture that came out of that. For example, what if food was a shared responsibility, meaning that access to healthy, affordable food isn't just an individual's responsibility. It's something we all have to take ownership of. Communities, governments, organizations all play a part in making sure that everyone has what they need, whether that's through better policies, local food programs, or stronger support systems. When food is treated as a human right, it shifts the focus from charity-based solutions to systemic changes that guarantee access for all, much like healthcare or education. A nature-centric approach to city planning was another idea that came out of this workshop as a way to prioritize green infrastructure, biodiversity, and sustainable land use, and food being a part of all of that. This would mean that designing cities with more green spaces, urban forests, pollinator-friendly gardens, and food-producing landscapes. would make urban areas more livable and more climate resilient. They also saw urban agriculture playing a key role in bridging ecological and economic care, and the potential that has to provide local jobs, reduce food miles, reduce carbon footprint, and repurpose underutilized urban spaces. Lastly, participants envisioned giving communities more control over their food systems by supporting things like local community leadership, neighborhood-run gardens, local food infrastructure, and culturally appropriate food production. They saw this as an opportunity to ensure that cities create more inclusive and sustainable food systems, and that residents are empowered to promote long-term resilience. So I think hope is important because it opens up space for creativity, agency, and alternative pathways. And that allows us to envision futures that are not simply extensions of the status quo. So I'd like to encourage the audience to dream a little and think about what hopes and desires you have for the future of urban agriculture.
And just a final note here on some things that we're dreaming about at this time in terms of our next research project. We recently been successful in an additional SSHRC grant, and Kassie, Joe, and I are all part of this project. And we're really going to be digging into the land use dynamics at the edge of an urban center and what that, in the context of Southwestern Ontario, and asking questions such as what impact does municipal development and urban boundary expansion have on farmland access in that urban adjacent or intra-urban and peri-urban setting, and what kinds of innovative environmental, economic land use models are emerging to address the declining farm population and farmland use and access, either for temporary use or more permanent interventions in that same setting. So perhaps a webinar in a few years if all goes well. But otherwise, we really appreciate you spending some time with us today, and would be happy to have a discussion and open the floor to any kinds of questions you might have.